There's a particular kind of loneliness that exists only within families. It's not the loneliness of being physically alone, it's the far more devastating loneliness of being surrounded by people who share your blood but don't see you, don't understand you, and perhaps most painfully, don't want to. You're sitting at the dinner table, surrounded by parents and siblings, and you might as well be invisible. Or worse, you're hypervisible, but only as the problem, the difficult one, the disappointment. This is the lived reality of the family black sheep. And if you've experienced it, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You know what it feels like to walk into a family gathering and feel the temperature drop. You know what it's like to have your accomplishments minimized and your mistakes magnified. You know the exhaustion of being the person everyone blames when something goes wrong, the one whose presence seems to make everyone else uncomfortable, the family member who's always somehow too much or not enough, but never just right. Today, we're going to explore the psychology behind this phenomenon, why families need a black sheep, how that role gets assigned, what it does to the person forced to carry it, and, most importantly, why being the black sheep might actually be a sign that you're the healthiest person in a deeply dysfunctional system.
Before we dive into the psychology, let's understand the origin of this metaphor, because language reveals cultural attitudes in fascinating ways. The term black sheep comes from an old agricultural reality. In a flock of white sheep, a black sheep stood out visually. In the days before modern dye technology, black wool was considered less valuable than white wool because it couldn't be dyed different colors. It was worth less in market terms, and shepherds generally preferred not to have black sheep in their flocks. But here's what's interesting from a biological perspective. The black coloring comes from a recessive gene. It's not a defect or a disease, it's simply genetic variation, a natural occurrence that happens when two copies of a particular gene combination express themselves. The black sheep isn't sick or damaged or wrong, it's just different. And that difference was enough to make it less desirable, less valued, marked as lesser than. The metaphor transferred easily to human families. The person who stands out, who doesn't conform to family norms, who is visibly different in temperament, values, or behavior becomes the black sheep, the one marked as less valuable, less desirable, the problem that needs to be managed or, if possible, corrected. What the metaphor reveals is a deep cultural discomfort with difference, with deviation from the norm, with standing out from the group. And families, as the most fundamental social unit, are often where this discomfort plays out with the most intensity and the most damage.
To understand why you became the black sheep, we need to understand the psychological function that role serves within family systems. Because here's the uncomfortable truth that family therapy research has consistently demonstrated. Families don't create black sheep by accident. The role serves a specific psychological purpose, and someone has to fill it for the family system to maintain its dysfunctional equilibrium. In family systems theory, there's a concept called homeostasis, the tendency of a system to maintain stability and resist change, even when that stability is unhealthy. Dysfunctional families maintain their equilibrium by organizing around shared narratives and role assignments that allow everyone to avoid looking at the real problems. The black sheep serves as what psychologists call the identified patient, or the symptom bearer, the family member who gets labeled as the problem so that everyone else can avoid examining their own issues, their own pain, their own complicity in the family dysfunction. As long as everyone can point to you and say, well, if it weren't for them, this family would be fine,
no one has to ask the harder questions. Why is this family so fragile that one person's difference threatens it? What are we all avoiding by focusing on this one person? What would we have to face about ourselves if we stopped blaming them? The black sheep becomes a container for everything the family doesn't want to acknowledge about itself. Your parents' marital problems? Easier to focus on your behavior than their failing relationship. Your siblings' insecurities and jealousies? Easier to unite against you than deal with their own issues. The family's collective trauma or dysfunction that no one wants to name? Easier to make you the problem than face the systemic issues. Psychologist Murray Bowen, who developed family systems theory, explained this through the concept of triangulation. In a dysfunctional system, when two people, let's say parents, have conflict or tension they can't resolve, they unconsciously bring in a third person to stabilize their relationship. That third person becomes the focus, the problem, the thing they can unite against. The black sheep is often this third point in the triangle, the person whose problems give the parents something to focus on other than their own failing relationship. And once you're cast in this role, it becomes self-perpetuating. The family develops what's called confirmation bias. They notice and remember everything you do that confirms the narrative that you're the problem, while conveniently forgetting or minimizing anything that contradicts it. You could do 99 things right and one thing wrong, and the one wrong thing will be what gets discussed, remembered, and held against you for years.
So, how did you become the black sheep? In most cases, it wasn't because of anything you actually did wrong. The assignment of this role typically happens in one of several ways, and none of them are really about you as a person. You were different from birth. Maybe you were a sensitive child in a family that valued toughness. Maybe you were introverted in an extroverted family. Maybe you were artistic in a family of engineers, or intellectual in a family that valued physical prowess. Maybe you asked too many questions in a family that valued conformity and obedience. The difference itself, which in a healthy family would be celebrated as part of human diversity, became threatening to a family that couldn't tolerate deviation from their norm. You were the truth teller. Some children have an innate inability to pretend that everything is fine when it clearly isn't. You might have been the child who said out loud what everyone was thinking, but no one was supposed to say. Why is Dad always drunk at dinner? Why does Mom cry in her room every night? Why do you two hate each other? Families organized around denial and secrets cannot tolerate truth tellers. You become the problem not because you're lying, but because you're telling the truth. And the truth is destabilizing to the carefully constructed fiction the family lives within. You reminded someone of someone else. Sometimes the assignment is about projection and displacement. Maybe you look like your father's sister who he hates. Maybe your personality reminds your mother of her own mother who abused her. Maybe you're the same gender as the parent who abandoned the family. You become the inheritor of rage and resentment that actually belongs to someone else entirely, someone from the past who wounded your parent in ways they never processed or healed. You were born at the wrong time. Maybe you were the child born during the worst period of your parents' marriage. Maybe you arrived when the family was going through financial crisis. Maybe your birth reminded everyone of a loss, a previous child who died, a miscarriage, a wanted pregnancy that became a resented reality. Through no fault of your own, you became associated with pain, stress, or trauma, and that association stuck. You refused to play your assigned role. Every dysfunctional family has roles. The hero child who makes the family look good, the caretaker who manages everyone's emotions, the lost child who stays invisible and causes no problems, the mascot who uses humor to deflect from pain. You might have been the child who assigned one of these roles and you refused to play it. You wouldn't be the achiever your parents needed to validate themselves.
You wouldn't be the caretaker who sacrificed your needs for everyone else's comfort. That refusal, which was actually a healthy assertion of self, got you marked as the problem. You were simply available. Sometimes the assignment is almost random. You were the child whose temperament made you respond to mistreatment in visible ways. When you were hurt, you cried or got angry or acted out, whereas your siblings learned to go silent and numb. Your visible reactions made you an easy target, and once you were targeted, the pattern entrenched itself. Living as the family black sheep doesn't just hurt in the moment. It creates deep psychological patterns that often persist long into adulthood, shaping how you see yourself, how you relate to others, and how you move through the world. Let's examine the specific trauma responses that develop when you grow up as the identified problem in your family system. Hypervigilance and rejection sensitivity. When you grow up knowing that you're always one mistake away from criticism, blame, or punishment, your nervous system learns to operate in a constant state of alert. You become exquisitely attuned to shifts in mood, changes in tone, subtle signs that you're about to be attacked or blamed. This hypervigilance doesn't shut off just because you leave the family home. You carry it into friendships, romantic relationships, workplaces, constantly scanning for signs of rejection, reading into every neutral interaction, waiting for the moment when people will inevitably turn on you because that's what your family taught you to expect. Psychologists call this rejection sensitivity, a heightened expectation and perception of rejection that can actually create self-fulfilling prophecies. You might push people away before they can reject you, or interpret ambiguous situations as rejection when none was intended, or sabotage relationships because you don't believe anyone could actually accept you given that your own family didn't. Shame and defective core belief. Perhaps the most damaging psychological consequence is the internalization of the family narrative. When everyone around you consistently treats you as the problem, when every family difficulty is somehow traced back to you, when you're constantly criticized and rarely validated, you begin to believe it. You develop what psychologists call a defective core belief, a fundamental sense that something is wrong with you at your core, that you are inherently flawed, broken, or bad. This isn't just low self-esteem, which is about doubting your abilities or appearance. This is deeper. It's a shame-based belief that your very existence is problematic, that who you are fundamentally is wrong. This core belief becomes a lens through which you interpret all your experiences. When good things happen, you can't fully receive them because the defective belief whispers that you don't deserve them. When bad things happen, they confirm what you already believed about yourself. Overachievement or self-sabotage. Black sheep often develop one of two seemingly opposite but psychologically related responses. Some become intense overachievers, desperately trying to prove their worth, to achieve enough that the family will finally have to acknowledge their value. These are the black sheep who become wildly successful in their careers, who achieve recognition outside the family, who accomplish objectively impressive things but still can't shake the feeling that they're frauds, that they're never enough, that one mistake will expose them as the failure their family always said they were. Others move in the opposite direction, into self-sabotage and underachievement. If you're going to be seen as a failure anyway, why try? If your accomplishments are going to be minimized or used against you, like you think you're better than us now, what's the point? This form of rebellion is actually a trauma response, a way of taking control of a narrative you couldn't control as a child. If you're going to be the problem, you might as well be the problem on your own terms. People-pleasing or radical independence. Some black sheep develop extreme people-pleasing tendencies, constantly trying to anticipate others' needs, working to make everyone comfortable, sacrificing their own boundaries and needs in desperate attempts to avoid being seen as difficult or problematic. They become hyper-aware of others' emotional states and skilled at managing them, often at tremendous cost to their own well-being. Others develop the opposite response, radical independence and difficulty trusting or depending on anyone. If your family of origin taught you that being vulnerable, having needs, or depending on others leads to being attacked or abandoned, you learn to never need anyone. You become the person who does everything alone, who won't ask for help even when drowning, who keeps everyone at arm's length because connection feels dangerous. Imposter syndrome and identity confusion. When you grow up being told that who you are is wrong, you often struggle to develop a coherent sense of identity. You might feel like you're performing a role rather than being yourself. You might have imposter syndrome in your achievements because part of you still believes the family narrative that you're not capable or worthy. You might struggle to know what you actually want versus what you've been conditioned to want or to reject. Many black sheep describe feeling like they're living in a fog, uncertain of who they really are because they spent so much of their formative years either trying to be what their family wanted or deliberately being the opposite of what their family wanted, but either way, defined in relation to the family rather than from some authentic internal sense of self.
For many black sheep, there comes a moment, sometimes in therapy, sometimes through a significant relationship, sometimes just through life experience and maturation, when the narrative suddenly shifts. You realize with devastating clarity, you're not the problem. You never were the problem. The family system was the problem, and you were cast in the role of scapegoat because the system needed someone to blame. This realization is simultaneously liberating and enraging. It's liberating because suddenly your entire history makes sense through a different lens. All those times you felt crazy for not understanding why you were being blamed, you weren't crazy. All those moments when the punishment seemed wildly disproportionate to what you'd actually done, that wasn't about you. All those years of feeling fundamentally defective, that was a lie you were taught, not a truth about who you are. But it's also enraging because you grieve what was stolen from you. You grieve the childhood you should have had, where your differences were celebrated rather than punished. You grieve the family relationships that could have existed if your family had been capable of health. You grieve the years you spent believing their narrative about you, the opportunities you didn't pursue because you believed you were incapable, the relationships you sabotaged because you believed you were unlovable. This awakening often comes when you've built a life outside the family system and you suddenly see the contrast. Maybe you have friends who celebrate your quirks rather than criticize them. Maybe you have a partner who sees your sensitivity as strength rather than weakness. Maybe you have colleagues who value exactly the qualities your family treated as problematic. Maybe you have children and you realize with horror that you could never treat them the way you were treated, that what was done to you was actually abusive, even though it was normalized as family dynamics. You start to see that the qualities your family called too sensitive are actually emotional intelligence and empathy. The trait they called rebellious was actually healthy boundary setting. The characteristic they labeled selfish was actually self-preservation. What they called attention-seeking was a child's legitimate need for love and validation. You weren't the problem. You were the person responding normally to an abnormal situation.
But here's where it gets psychologically complicated. Even after you intellectually understand that you weren't the problem, the emotional programming runs deep. You might know logically that your family's treatment was unjust, but you still feel the shame, still hear their critical voices in your head, still flinch at the thought of displeasing people, still struggle with the defective core belief they installed. This is cognitive dissonance, holding two contradictory beliefs simultaneously. Intellectually, you know you're not defective. Emotionally, you still feel like you are. Rationally, you know their treatment was wrong, but some part of you still believes you must have deserved it somehow, that there must have been something about you that justified their response. This is because trauma doesn't live in the logical, rational part of your brain. It lives in the limbic system, in the body, in patterns established before you had language to name what was happening. You can't think your way out of trauma responses that were encoded before you had the cognitive capacity to process them consciously. Many black sheep describe feeling like they're living a double life. The life where they know the truth about their family and their own worth, and the shadow life where they still carry all the programming, all the pain, all the internalized shame. The work of healing involves slowly, painstakingly bridging that gap between what you know and what you feel. One of the most painful aspects of being the black sheep is watching your family maintain their narrative even when confronted with evidence that contradicts it. You try to talk to them about how their treatment affected you, and they deny it happened, minimize it, blame you for being too sensitive, or insist you're remembering it wrong. You try to show them who you actually are, and they can't see it. They only see the role they've assigned you. This is because acknowledging your truth would require them to examine their own behavior, their own culpability, their own pain. If you weren't actually the problem, then they were wrong. If their treatment of you was unjust, then they harmed you. If the family system was dysfunctional, then they were part of that dysfunction. These realizations are too threatening to their own sense of self, their own narrative about being good parents or good people. So they double down on the narrative. They find evidence to support their view and ignore evidence that contradicts it. They rewrite history to make themselves look better and you look worse. They recruit other family members to validate their version of events, creating what therapists call flying monkeys, people who carry out the emotional abuse on behalf of the primary abuser. This is perhaps the loneliest part of the black sheep experience, realizing that reconciliation might not be possible because it would require the family to undergo a level of self-examination they're not capable of or willing to do. You're waiting for them to see you, to validate your experience, to apologize, to change, and they're incapable of it, because doing so would threaten the psychological structure they've built their entire identity around.
So where does this leave you? If the family narrative was a lie, if you spent years carrying shame that didn't belong to you, if the people who were supposed to love you unconditionally instead made you the scapegoat for their dysfunction, what now? The path forward involves what therapists call narrative therapy, the practice of rewriting your story, taking the exact same facts but interpreting them through a lens of truth rather than through the distorted lens your family provided. In the family story, you were the problem child, the difficult one, the disappointment. In the true story, you were a child responding naturally to an unnatural situation. You were a sensitive person in an environment that punished sensitivity. You were a truth teller in a family organized around lies. You were an individual in a system that demanded conformity. You were healthy in a sick system, and the system attacked you for it. In the family story, your differences were flaws. In the true story, your differences were gifts. They just weren't gifts your family could receive because they were too threatened by them. Your sensitivity allowed you to see truths others missed. Your intensity gave you passion and conviction. Your refusal to pretend gave you integrity. The very things they punished you for were actually your greatest strengths. In the family story, you deserved the treatment you received. In the true story, no child deserves to be scapegoated, blamed, or made to feel defective for being who they are. The treatment was about their limitations, not your inadequacies. This rewriting isn't about denying what happened or pretending it didn't hurt. It's about reclaiming interpretive authority over your own life. You get to decide what your story means. You get to choose the lens through which you understand your past. And you get to write the next chapters from a place of truth rather than from internalized family pathology. Here's something that might sound strange after everything we've discussed. Being the family black sheep, while painful, often becomes a strange gift. Not because the pain was good or necessary or something to be grateful for, but because being cast out of a dysfunctional system often allows you to see it clearly in ways that people still embedded in it never can. Black sheep often become the healthiest members of their families precisely because they were forced to leave, forced to build lives outside the family system, forced to question the narratives they were raised with.
They often develop the deepest psychological insight, the most authentic relationships, the strongest sense of self because they had to. Survival demanded it. Many black sheep describe eventually feeling grateful, even while still acknowledging the pain, that they weren't the golden child, the family favorite, the one who never questioned. Because those children often remain enmeshed, unable to develop independent identities, still performing for family approval in their 40s and 50s, still living according to scripts written by damaged parents. You got cast out, which meant you had to find yourself. You weren't given the option of remaining in comfortable denial. You were forced to do the hard work of building a self that wasn't defined by family pathology. And while that work is painful and ongoing, it's also what allows you to live authentically in ways that many people never achieve. Black sheep often become therapists, social workers, advocates, artists, writers, people who understand pain and marginalization, who can see systems clearly, who refuse to perpetuate dysfunction. They break generational cycles. They become safe people for others who've been cast out. They create the families they needed, either through chosen family or by parenting their own children with the love they didn't receive.
So here's the final reframe, the ultimate truth that changes everything. You were never actually the black sheep, the defective one, the problem. You were the person in the family who could see. You were the canary in the coal mine whose sensitivity detected toxicity that others were numb to. You were the truth teller in a family of liars. You were the individual in a cult of conformity. You were the healthy cell in a sick body, and the sick body tried to destroy you to maintain its disease. The family didn't reject you because something was wrong with you. They rejected you because something was wrong with them, and your presence made that wrongness visible. You were living evidence that another way was possible, and that possibility was threatening to people who'd built their entire identities around the dysfunction. So if you're the family black sheep, know this. Your differentness was never a flaw. Your sensitivity was never weakness. Your refusal to pretend was never betrayal. You were just a person trying to be real in a system that demanded performance, trying to be healthy in a system organized around sickness, trying to be yourself in a system that demanded you be someone else. And that's not a deficit. That's courage. That's integrity. That's strength. You're not the black sheep. You're the free one. You're the one who got out. You're the one who broke the cycle. You're the one who chose truth over comfort, authenticity over approval, freedom over belonging to a system that required you to betray yourself. And that's not a consolation prize. That's actually winning. Even if it doesn't feel like it yet, even if the pain is still sharp, even if you still wish your family could see you. You won by becoming yourself despite everything they did to prevent it. And that self, the real, authentic, no longer performing you, is not just enough, it's extraordinary. Not because you're perfect, but because you're real. And in a world of performance and pretense, reality is the rarest, most valuable thing there is. So wear the label if you must. Be the black sheep, but know what it actually means. You're the one who could see in a family of the blind. You're the one who stayed human in a system trying to make you a role. You're the one who survived the thing designed to destroy you. And you're still here, still standing, still becoming, still building the life they said you weren't capable of, still proving every day that their narrative about you was a lie. That's not defeat, that's victory, the quietest, most profound kind there is. If this video put words to something you've lived but never had language for, you're not alone, and you're exactly who this channel is for. Like this video so it reaches other black sheep who still think they're the problem. Comment below with one line that resonated with you or your own experience. You might say what someone else has been afraid to admit. Subscribe if you want more deep dives into psychology, trauma, family systems, and healing without sugarcoating or blame. Share this with the one person who needs to hear they were never broken. And when you're ready, watch the other videos on the channel. They're all here to help you untangle old narratives, reclaim your truth, and keep building a life that's actually yours.